Elden Ring's biggest problem is that it has many fights with unreactable attacks and exhaustive combo chains. Elden Ring inherits these design features from one specific From Software game, Sekiro. Attacks in Soulslike come in two forms. The first is an anticipatory attack, a clear telegraph of the incoming attack with a substantial time window between the end of the telegraph and the moment of damage. This you can sight read. Sight reading means that after the telegraph of an attack, you can successfully dodge just as the attack is coming at you. You are reading the attack motion and reacting to it. The second type is a predictive attack. There may be a clear telegraph of the incoming attack, but the time window between the end of the telegraph and the moment of damage is near instantaneous. This cannot be sight read, but it can be predicted, meaning that you must dodge the attack before the telegraph has ended. Instead of reacting to the attack motion, you are predicting it. The only way to do this is if you've seen the attack before. Every attack in these games is one of these two types, with some amount of variety and different timings and twists added on top of them. Tracking attacks, short and long combos with a mixture of straightforward and delayed attacks, things like breath attacks, grab attacks, attacks that end in an explosion or a quick follow-up, and a long assortment of flashy moves which focus on impressive visuals.
Like, tell me that's not a fucking awesome move.
With all of these variations, there are still fundamentally only two types of attacks, anticipatory and predictive. Keep these distinctions in your mind because they'll be important later. For now, we're going to go into the history of the Soulslikes, barring Demon Souls. In Dark Souls, the game's enemy and encounter variety added more depth to the combat, but there was a limit on how complex an enemy could be due to the player's only defensive actions being to block, dodge, or move out of the way. Moreover, shield players won't be doing much dodging, and shieldless players won't be blocking at all. This lack of response variety constricts enemy encounters, but fortunately for the first Dark Souls, the gameplay was fresh enough that this theoretical issue never bloomed into an actual one. Bloodborne is interesting because it commits to just one reaction, dodging. Because of that, and the addition of the rally system, fights were much faster and more aggressive. Dodging now took less stamina and had less commitments, allowing you to attack faster and more often. So instead of blocking or rolling, you were dash stepping, weaving hits, and healing quickly. Bloodborne gives you the freedom to be aggressive, and once again, it was something fresh.
Here we fucking go.
Dark Souls 3, conversely, is a return to form. You can move much faster, the dodge is improved, and overall, movement feels better than in the first game. Yet still, by the end of the game, you are being pressed up against the weight of From Software's design limitations with a system that is either roll or block for defense. Despite the harsh limitations on what kind of responses they could build encounters around, they did a pretty good job while maintaining a high level of spectacle and mostly fair difficulty. But I'll admit I was tiring of learning attack patterns to dodge my way through each encounter. You can see in some of the footage that I was just practicing parry runs because I needed some way to enjoy the game. It was obvious that the foundations set by Dark Souls 1 were beginning to falter, and that's when Sekiro changed everything. You only have one weapon, which gives less variety compared to the different builds in other games, but the true masterstroke of Sekiro's combat is that defensive play is also a part of your offensive capabilities. In a fight, you'll be asked to both block and dodge. Blocking damages your enemy, and you'll be tested on types of dodging too. Directional dodges, Mikiri counters, and jumps. Lingering on jumping for a moment, Sekiro lets you be Mario and punish an enemy's attack with a kick to the head. Contrast this with Elden Ring, which introduces the jump mechanic but lacks communication about which attacks you can jump over. There are no symbols telling you which attacks are avoidable, which would be fine, but there's little reason to what attacks you can jump. You'd think that all ground-based attacks and low sleeps would be jumpable, but they aren't. The jump is also largely ignored in enemy design, with only two main bosses, both at the end of the game, requiring a jump dodge.
You got what I need.
Back to Sekiro, one of the most important aspects of combat is one I touched on. Blocking damages your enemy. If you deflect every attack in an enemy combo, then you are filling up the enemy's posture bar, which will climax with a death blow. The result of this is a combat scenario which rewards both offensive and defensive play with damage to the enemy. This is the reason enemies can be given longer attack chains in Sekiro, because no matter how long an attack chain, the player can continually deal damage to the enemy. For other Souls-likes, and specifically Elden Ring, defensive combat will never have this sort of impact on the enemy. While blocking still exists to stagger enemies, it rarely fully blocks an attack, leaving you with dodging as your one and only surefire defensive option. Dodging does nothing to the enemy and depletes your stamina. Introduce attack chains into this system, and rather than flowing between two forms of damaging your enemy, you're forced into a game of waiting for your moment to strike. This is expressed clearly in the final boss fight, where I am forced into spectating the boss's attacks for so long that I've sped up the fight to show you what's happening without needing to show 5 minutes of video. While Sekiro is akin to dueling, Elden Ring is far more akin to fishing. Dark Souls 3 has its fair share of predictive attacks to spice up the FromSoft formula, but it's Sekiro which fully embraces the idea of predictive attacks. The reasons for this are twofold. Predictive attacks are more reflective of the Sengoku era in Japan, and reliable blocking allows the player to negate attacks they don't see coming. You can hold a block to give yourself time to understand the opponent's attacks. Once you feel you can predict the attack, you can start to parry. Importantly, the player cannot continually block as their posture will be broken, but they can use it just enough to learn the enemy's attack. Because of this, the designers were free to introduce as many predictive attacks as they wanted with the knowledge that the player could always avoid the damage. That's the key takeaway from Sekiro's combat design. The player now had a way to avoid damage from an attack they had never seen before. Elden Ring lacks a reliable block, with many builds neglecting a shield and many shields having their own vulnerabilities. Not to mention, many attacks in Elden Ring can go through shields. And yet, Elden Ring still introduces an enormous amount of predictive attacks. This design feature and flaw is displayed fully with the first enemy of the game. Many of its attacks are predictive, requiring you to first know the attack to reliably avoid it. Keep in mind that, while a player could have a shield at this point, another player won't have a shield, leaving dodging as the only assured way to dodge these attacks. This example is not a cheeky outlier meant to punish the player, but a bold declaration of how Elden Ring's combat will be different than Dark Souls. There will be a lot of predictive attacks, so prepare to die. Many of the final fights in this game feel like Sekiro fights without understanding why Sekiro fights work so well, and without updating the player tools enough to reasonably deal with them. If Elden Ring is going to introduce new movement mechanics, then it's important for those mechanics to be woven into the combat for more depth. If a boss can enter incredibly long combo chains, then it's important to give the player worthwhile and fun defensive options. If an enemy can attack without anticipation, then the player ought to have a way to avoid that damage in the short term, to avoid unfair deaths and aid their combat mastery. All of these are brilliant design lessons from Sekiro which were left behind in the process of taking Sekiro's best features into Elden Ring.
Mighty dragon, thou'rt a true-born heir. Lend me thy strength, O kindred. Deliver me unto greater heights.
What could have been a beautiful blend of two polar games in the From catalog instead ends up as a mound of flailing parts with no reason. In From Software's titles, there seems to be this back and forth of making Souls games then something new. Dark Souls, then Bloodborne, Dark Souls 3, then Sekiro, and now, Elden Ring, then Armored Core. To have every other title be innovative is quite a rare thing for a AAA studio. I enjoyed my time with Elden Ring just as much as Sekiro, but hopefully this video has illuminated how one game's combat design feature can turn into another game's combat design flaw.